Howard, your book Kings and Pawns. Here's the thing that is just so fascinating to me. So many people, obviously, sports, television, know about Jackie Robinson. Breaking the color barrier in white man's baseball. I don't call it major leagues because, frankly, the major stars were in the Negro leagues. So I call it white man's baseball, and that's what it was. But it is amazing to me how many people have no clue how huge Paul Robeson was. It's amazing to me that when we talk about these seminal figures of the 20th century in the fight for civil and human rights, rarely is his name ever mentioned. I read a biography of him in 1990. I've got a couple of his books. His son put out a two-part two-volume, The Undiscovered Paul Robeson. And it is crazy to me that this Renaissance man, who singer, athlete, lawyer, actor, activist, all of this is essentially written out not only American history, but Black history.
Black history. You know what the most amazing thing to me is, and I will amplify that. I will tell you that in the 4 years, I've been thinking about this book since 2017. So it's about, that's almost 9 years since I started thinking about it. And then the 4+ years that it took to write it. When I would tell Black people what I was working on next, they didn't hear of Paul Robeson. A lot, not a small number, a lot. And you have to forgive a lot of the younger people if you want to, people in their 20s and 30s, and they don't know what happened last Thursday. But even our generation, people and you know what? And I'm not shading them and I'm not shaming them at all, because you know what? I'm also going to put myself in that category. I knew who Paul Robeson was. I didn't know what Paul Robeson was. I knew.
Right.
I knew because when I was in college, at Temple University in the late 80s, Robeson had only been dead about 10, 12 years. So his presence was all over Philadelphia, in Black Philadelphia. But that didn't mean you knew exactly what he was all about and who he was. And as a professional in this business, I had been writing about baseball for 30 years. And how many times have I written about Jackie Robinson? How many times have I read about Jackie Robinson? How many books have I mentioned Robinson in? How many times did I read the sentence, in 1949, Jackie Robinson testified against Paul Robeson in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and then kept it moving? That it's my fault as well. I was embarrassed when I was, I'm going, wait a minute. You've got two of the most titanic Black American figures, two of the most titanic American figures of the 20th century. And they were placed in opposition to each other in front of the entire country, and I kept it moving. So it was time to really look at this and say, wait a minute, this is news. This is history. This is our history. And I think you're right. One of the big questions for this, for me, in terms of working on this, has been, how was it possible to erase Paul Robeson? And one of the places where I go with this is, it was the same thing with Malcolm X. When you think about what happened to Malcolm X, Spike Lee happened to Malcolm X. If you look at what happened to what Malcolm X was pre-1992, he was shaped by white America. He was a villain. He was not taught in schools. He was not considered an American hero, even by a lot of Black people, because of the opposition with the church, because he was Muslim. And then Spike got a hold of him. And then he was reclaimed to us. And Paul Robeson has never gotten that type of reappraisal.
No, he hasn't. The book that I read was by Martin Duberman.
89. Called terrific. Fantastic.
Paul Robeson. It was, well-researched, just unbelievable. And I'm reading this, and the reason it jumped out, because it came out in 89. I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha in 1989. And he was an Alpha. And I'm reading this book, and I'm just sitting here going, if you want to talk about if you need a definition, and a literal figure of a Renaissance man,
That's right.
Paul Robeson. I mean, the talents that this man had, immeasurable.
As a teenager as well. I mean, here's somebody who was an orator in high school, going nationally into debate teams. Here's a guy who was he's only the third Black student to ever attend Rutgers University in New Jersey, New Brunswick. And what I found so fascinating about him was not just the level of talent. I mean, he was one of the greatest college football players of all time. And then he's one of the great actors of all time.
But wait, hold on. Don't skip lacrosse.
And baseball. And basketball.
Dude was everybody talk about Jim Thorpe, America's greatest athlete. No shade on Jim Thorpe. I'm putting Paul Robeson in the same category. This man was unbelievable.
It really is amazing. And I think that the Robeson that we know, the little bit of him that we know him on concerts. We know him for music. We know him for, Othello. And he's so much more than all of those things. And I think, to me, what really made this book important, like why I wanted to do this, was because it's intentional. You can't erase somebody like that by accident. Time didn't just erase him. It wasn't like he was born in the 1700s. He died in 1976.
Right.
He lived longer than Jackie Robinson.
Wait a minute. It's not like we didn't have film, video. It's not like we didn't have his voice. It was all right there.
No, that's right. And I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this, so I'm really happy that you're having me on and we can talk about this, is that you're a political guy, right? This is a fastball down the middle for you in terms of the strategy. What I wanted to do in this book, I'm completely, I just get so exasperated that Black history is always isolated as Black history and not American history. And that I wanted to take a story, the Cold War. And if it's not Black, we don't get involved. We don't get included. If it's not civil rights, we don't get included. If it's not desegregation or racism, we don't get included. But the Cold War belonged to everybody, and there was a huge Black component to that. You have Jackie Robinson placed in the middle of it. You had Paul Robeson placed in the middle of it. You had them placed against each other in the middle of it. And for me, one of there were really four characters to this book. One is Robeson, the other is Robinson, the third is Branch Rickey, but the fourth is the Black leadership, is the NAACP and the Urban League. And what were the strategies? If you were African American in 1949, post-war America, and you are in the middle of the beginning of the civil rights movement, you are coming home from the war and then being placed right back into segregation. And now you've got this supposed, this Red Scare, this second Red Scare coming, and people are trying to place you in the center of it to prove your Americanism, which is what they were doing to Jackie Robinson, while at the same time, you're trying to fight segregation. So there's this question, it's like the W.E.B. Du Bois's two-ness. How are you supposed to defend the United States while you're living in a segregated society? So you had this Black leadership that was really in the middle of it. And Robeson was an unabashed progressive, unabashed connections with the Communist Party, unabashed anti-capitalist. He was very, very clear. He was a Wallace man. He was very much against the capitalist American imperial design that so many of us are told that has to be our ideal. And so you've got these two people, and Robeson's voice is so big. He's the guy. He is the number one Black voice in America. And to counter that, you go to baseball, you go to Jackie Robinson, and you find, okay, well, whose Black voice is big enough to counter Robeson? And that's how you have Robinson and Robeson placed against each other. And they never even met. They don't even know each other.
Now that's, again, okay, I got to come back to that. But I got to stay on this whole point of what you just said, because I guarantee you somebody is watching and listening going, How was this man the biggest voice in Black America, and we don't know about him? And you actually you answered that, because the first thing I looked up, I went to the back and I wanted to see how many times you mentioned Harry Belafonte in here, and it was one reference. And you said the late Harry Belafonte once referred to Robeson as one of our kings. How then could a king become so obscure, especially to his own people? And the reason I had to look up that, I was friends with Mr. B, interviewed him many times, and he
Loved
talked about Robeson, and it was Robeson who passed the baton to him,
and to James
and
Earl Jones, and to Denzel,
right,
and to everybody who,
right.
you know,
Well, what really passed that baton, not just on the acting side, but on the activism
on the
side.
activism side. That's right.
And the thing that, and so when you just said the number one voice in Black America, and that makes it even more crazy that people go, Paul who? I mean, this, I don't think people really grasp how major this man was, and he was not shy about advancing the cause of people of African descent.
And what does that tell you, right? It tells you that if you have somebody that big who's also that erased, the massive campaign required to erase him, what it took to actually erase him. And I think that this is one of the reasons why this book was so compelling to me, was the Black leadership's decision, and also let me step back, the romance that comes with this. On the one hand, there's this romance of what would have happened had Martin lived, and had Jackie lived longer, and had Malcolm X lived. What would the Black voice have been going into the late 60s and the early 70s and beyond? But there's also another romance too, which I find very interesting in terms of trying to figure out what to do with that. And it is, was there a possibility for a true Pan-African movement? The thing that I really found fascinating about this book was all of the African independence, anti-colonial movements that were taking place at the exact same time as the civil rights movement. But because of the Cold War, because of this USA versus the Soviet Union, Black leadership in the United States really did decouple from those movements because they didn't want to be called anti-American.
Just last night.
Was there a place? I'm just going to say, Roland. So the question really is: was there, an opportunity there to really couple the African struggle, the Caribbean struggle, the African American struggle, in a lot of ways, the Black and brown struggle, the Indian struggle, the Vietnamese struggle? Robeson was the guy, and in a lot of ways, the same way that people were afraid of Fred Hampton. He was the one who could couple all of these people together. And for that reason, a lot of people felt he needed to be destroyed.
What you just said that triggered something, because literally last night, God, it was 3:00 in the morning. I'm sitting here, and I have a habit of, you're supposed to not look at your phone for the last couple of hours so you can go to sleep, but my brain doesn't work that way. And I came across this post, and it was talking about the release of some State Department papers and the role that the United States and France played in creating the economic conditions that led to the coup in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. And the thing that you just said there that I just think a lot of people really don't understand is really after World War II, and then you had the Korean War, that's when you begin to see these African nations gaining independence. And that was a real relationship there between African Americans and African leaders. And to your point about the Cold War, what was LBJ and his State Department so worried about? They were worried about the communist influence in Ghana.
And the resources
the CIA,
in the ground.
Right. The role the CIA played in taking out Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, that frankly destabilized that country even to its present day. And all these African countries that were fighting for their freedom, that were gaining their liberation. And the United States is like, okay, yeah, you free, but oh my goodness, we're not going to help you, but don't you dare go over to the Russians, then taking out leader after leader. And we could go on and on and on. And here you had an individual who in the 40s and 50s who saw that before it happened, and who was connecting. He was connecting the African-American lived experience in the United States with the African diaspora. So it's crazy. More of us talk about Marcus Garvey and Pan-Africanism and not Robeson, who really was, as he was speaking and singing all across the world, he
That's right.
understood it, he saw it, he didn't deny his African roots, but he made clear what you're not going to do is shame me and take away what my African American roots are.
Well, that's right. And on top of that, you can't have that conversation without Du Bois, because Du Bois, he had been holding Pan-African conferences since the 20s. And so even, before World War I. And so there is a great history here. There's a long history here. And I think, this is one of the reasons why you have to, and you and I have been talking about this stuff for years offline, this is why you have to have Black media. You have to have the Black story told by and for Black people, because it does disappear. And a lot of the things that I found in the research, that I enjoyed in the research, was just another reminder, especially when you go back to the 1700s and the 1800s, about how much the Black leadership was from the clergy and from academia, in a lot of ways that it is now. But it's so co-opted now by athletics and by celebrity, that you forget that the real intellectual voices of Black history have been there for a very, very long time. And you look at what Du Bois had been doing, and Robeson was and he wasn't a Du Bois disciple per se, but they were they became, right after World War II, right in lockstep in making the connection between the Black experience, the Caribbean experience, the African experience, and the destructiveness of capitalism. That when you just do the numbers, the raw numbers, Black people can't win at the capitalist game, and yet we sell empire to each other all the time. We still sell that idea that there's a seat at the table for you as a Black capitalist. Robeson and Du Bois said no, that those numbers do not add up in your favor, and what you really do need is a social revolution.
You talked about pursuing the writing of this book. What sparked it? What was there a particular thing? What was it where you said, man, this story, it's been talked about, but it really has not been told?
Yeah, it was the intro to the heritage. Black athletes had divided America in the politics of patriotism, the book that I wrote in 2018. The intro of that book begins with Robeson's testimony in 1956, because the United States had denied him a passport for 6 years up to that point, and it would be 8 years. He wouldn't get his passport until 1958. So from 1950 to 1958, he was prevented from even leaving the country and earning a living. And so while thinking about this heritage, thinking about Kaepernick and Jackie Robinson and Bill, and Jim Brown and Bill Russell, somebody was missing, Paul Robeson. And you go back and then you listen to Robeson. And while I was working on that introduction, I was like, wait a minute. This isn't an introduction. This isn't a magazine piece. This is a book. What happened? How many times have I read this story that Jackie Robinson testified against Robeson and never did anything with it? And it was from that moment where it was like, no, find out what happened.
Or actually, in some cases, 1 second, in some cases, the story was Jackie Robinson testified against communism.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times they don't even just mention, but what you're talking about is it was specific. They said, we need Robinson to take this man out.
Well, what is the one thing we always talk about, Roland? We've been doing this for years, right? The Black man who is willing to criticize another Black person publicly will have a job for life. You will have a job for life if you take on that role. That role is always essential. It's essential today. It was essential then. And yes, Robeson's voice was so big that he was targeted. And so the question of it all was why and who and how did this happen? And Jackie Robinson wasn't even really a political figure at that time. Jackie Robinson there was no track record of Jackie Robinson taking on national political conversations, any political questions outside of his own court-martial and talking about racism until that day. What happened and who drove it? And that's where you bring in Branch Rickey. That's where you bring in the the story of baseball integration. And you realize, once again, when we talk about who gets to tell your story and how is that story told and who gets to frame it and shape it, you take the step back and you realize that people have treated April 15th, 1947, the day that Robinson integrated the big leagues. That was the day that everything was fine, and then we moved on. But what we don't really talk about was the fact that that Paul Robeson, years earlier in 1943, met with the baseball owners to convince them to integrate, to add Black players. So how does this happen? Who puts Jackie Robinson up to this? How does he end up in front of Congress? And the reason is Branch Rickey. The reason is that the Branch Rickey, and when you take that step back and you dig into the research and you go through all the files and the Library of Congress and the microfilm and everything else, you realize that it was Jackie's loyalty. Branch Rickey had an obsession with Paul Robeson for years. And essentially the way that I frame it in the book is that Rickey had been looking for his Robeson for a very long time, and he found it, or at least he thought he had found it, in Jackie Robinson.
And the reason I think that's important is because, again, when we talk about history and Branch Rickey, he's held up as this progressive ally of African-American interests, because he was the one who stood up to white baseball and advocated, I'm going to sign this African-American. We're going to break the color barrier. And when you look at the movies and the TV shows, it's always Branch Rickey is held in this high esteem. But it's the same individual who said, we got to take down the top leader of Black America.
Well, nobody, Roland, has had a more unassailable record than Branch Rickey when it comes to the telling of the story of baseball integration. And the reason is because everyone has always taken Branch Rickey's version of it. There's never really been a competing narrative to how this happened, to how did it happen. And there have been
sort of like Lincoln freed the slaves. He loved Black people.
That's right.
Calm down. As Paul Harvey would say, now the rest of the story.
The rest of the story, and the rest of the story was that, and once again, let's talk about these people and be complicated. Let's be complicated about this, because life is complicated and history is complicated. The beauty of the research is that baseball had never released the transcripts. I didn't even know there were transcripts of the baseball winter meetings, December 3rd, 1943. Paul Robeson addresses the baseball owners in front of the winter meetings to get them to integrate, to convince them to integrate. I'd heard of this story peripherally. I didn't know there was a transcript. The transcript wasn't even made available until 2017, 2018. It's at the Baseball Hall of Fame up in Cooperstown. Not available online. You got to go up there and go get the ledger and have them wheel it out and you can look at it. It's the first time where you see who was in that room, and it's a remarkable document. Paul Robeson is talking to these incredibly secretive minutes, the first and only time the Black press actually got an audience with all of the baseball owners. And nothing came of that, and it just disappeared into history. But inside that transcript, when Robeson gives his presentation, and then the Black press, the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender, when they speak, then baseball goes back and does its business. And then they go to, they're about to end. And before the meeting adjourns, Branch Rickey says, is anyone going to talk about the Black delegation that just addressed us? And nobody says anything. And so that is the first moment that you see that Branch Rickey's up to something. And he couches it in the meeting that, well, part of the reason he wants to talk about this is because all the left-wing communist progressive groups are harassing him to integrate. And because he's in Brooklyn, he's getting it worse than everybody else, as opposed to when he was in St. Louis. And so what are we going to do about this? And the answer is essentially nothing. But that's the first seed. And then, of course, Landis dies the next year. And then a year after that, Branch Rickey does his thing. So you can see in that document that he is planning something. He's the one guy in that entire meeting. Tom Yockey's there. The Wrigleys are there. Connie Mack is in that meeting. Griffith is in that meeting. All the old baseball names that we all know are in that meeting, and only one guy spoke up, and it was Branch Rickey. But the other piece of this is that Branch Rickey had no intention of integrating. He hated black baseball. He had no respect for black baseball. He thought that the Negro Leagues were run by lowlifes and gangsters and numbers runners. He did not believe that black players were the best minorities to integrate. He spent his time, and admits this in a 1955 interview in Pittsburgh when he's the general manager of the Pirates, that he spent $25,000 scouring Mexico and Venezuela and Cuba and the Dominican Republic, looking for the right player to integrate. And the reason he did that was because he had no intention of upsetting American segregation. The Latino players could have come over here. He would have gotten credit for integrating baseball, but then they could go home. So in a lot of ways, he's not that different from Bill Levitt, from Levittown. You know, when the Levitt brothers made all of the housing in the post-war, the suburban housing coming out of the war, where it was new housing, but it was segregated. And Bill Levitt had said, well, I can solve a housing problem or I can solve a racial problem, but I can't solve both. And that's where Branch Rickey was until, after spending $25,000, realized that the best black players were actually American and they were in the Negro Leagues. And that's where he had to go get those players. And he ends up with Robinson and Newcomb and Roy Campanella, and the rest is history. But if Branch Rickey had had his way, he would have left American segregation just the way it was. He would have signed a Mexican player. He would have signed a Dominican player. And in a lot of ways, he was the precursor to what we see now, which is baseball is primarily a Latino minority sport and not a black sport anymore. It just happened to be that the greatest black players happened to be American. But that was not the intention. And no one has really challenged that narrative until now.
Well, that's why I used the Lincoln reference. So when Lerone Bennett came out with his book, and people were just aghast. How dare you? Because he challenged the prevailing notion that Lincoln was really committed to ending slavery. It was a just cause. And then all of a sudden you begin to realize, well, Lincoln said, if I can end this war with slavery, I will do it. If I can end it without, I will do it to end this war. And Lincoln's personal comments, and then wanting to ship black folks off back to Africa, supporting sending folks to Liberia, and all of that. And so even in, look, 2000, this year, America will be celebrating 250 years of the country, and Trump and his MAGA people are going to be presenting this whole other alternative history. But what you just laid out is the exact same thing. That Branch Rickey, Branch Rickey was amazing. I mean,
But here's the thing, Roland, not to cut you off there, but here's the thing, and this is why I enjoy this so much, because it is complicated. He did it. He did do it. And that's the other piece of this, right? Is that he did do it. And then we did the rest.
I think our point, just like when we say, yes, Lincoln did sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, Lincoln did create the Freedmen's Bank, but Lincoln also said this, and I think what we're saying is both are true. So therefore, we can say both things are true, but let's not act like the other stuff didn't happen.
That's right. And then also the other piece of it is that why was Paul Robeson such a threat to Branch Rickey? It's because Branch Rickey wasn't progressive. Branch Rickey was one of the original, he was aligned with some of the most rabid right-wing elements in the country. And he was absolutely and he placed Jackie Robinson in a terrible position. And this goes back to, in the book, this is why the book is called Kings and Pawns, because you've got these giants, our kings, Jackie and Robeson and Du Bois. And then on the other hand, you have these elements that are also using them for their purposes. And I don't know what to do with it. So I hope I tried to take as basic a position as I could in the manuscript, by saying, okay, the most important thing to do in this book is to give people an idea of just how disqualifying, just how destructive the word communism was. Like, this was the most devastating word in the American language to your career, and to be associated with the Soviet Union during those years, even leading up to the McCarthy years. Everybody ran for cover. It was kryptonite. You could not be part of this. And Robeson stood tall. Robeson was essentially Ali, like, no Viet Cong ever called me nigger, right? So that's where he was at. He was not going to abandon the relationships that he had over there, even though the entire political winds had shifted. And so on the one hand, you look at this and you go, okay, what was the NAACP to do? What was the Urban League? What were these groups going to do? It's like, we are trying to get our civil rights right now. We are trying to break through coming out of this war. We need the military to be desegregated. We need civil rights to move forward. We need housing. We need all of these things. And we're not going to get them. Our white allies are going to run for cover if we align ourselves with Robeson, and if we align ourselves with the old progressives. So you've got a political battle here taking place of what is the proper tactic.
And do you believe when you talk about reckoning with why, and as I was just thinking about it, one, this happens. I mean, Robertson is barely in the major leagues. This is 2 years.
Yep.
But one of the things that they did is what has always happened, that in moments of so-called national unity,
mm-hmm.
what white America has always said to the Negro, to the African American, to the brother and sister of African descent, please do us a favor, and
mm-hmm.
I need you to put your blackness aside.
Yep.
I need you to put your complaints aside. I need you to put your gripes aside.
The cause of national unity.
And stand with us against this evil. And they leaned, because Jackie Robinson served in the United States Army, leaned on that, where Robeson was saying, wait a minute, I am an American. I love my country, but I cannot act like these other things are happening to me.
That's right.
While you want me to wrap myself in the American flag so you can be comfortable.
That's right. Well, as did Du Bois, because we saw what happened in World War I. In World War I, A. Philip Randolph and Du Bois did do that for the cause of national unity. We're going to take our civil rights complaints and we're going to table them until the war is over. And when the war was over, Black soldiers came back and got destroyed. Look at all of the violence. This is one of the most violent periods in American history toward Black people. You've got Tulsa happening. You've got East St. Louis happening in 1921. You've got 1917 was East St. Louis. 1921 is Tulsa. You've got so much violence, and a lot of that violence is directed at returning soldiers and the returning Black soldiers. And the message is very clear. Do not think that fighting for freedom is going to gain your freedom when you come home. So now
that's why in World War II, Pittsburgh Courier said,
we're not doing that.
Hey, we remember what happened last time.
That's
the double V campaign.
That's
victory
right.
at home and victory abroad.
That's right. And because of that, what is happening in baseball at that same time? You've got Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis saying, writing letters, and the baseball owners are writing letters back to him saying, look at what the Blacks are doing. Look what they're really doing. The reason why Robeson was actually brought to speak in front of the major league owners in 1943 was because they used him the same way they would use Jackie 6 years later, as a counter to the protest, because the Black press was coming for them, because the black press had planned a protest in front of the baseball owners' headquarters. And so in order to put that protest down, they went to the Black press and they opened the door instead of having the protest outside of the door. So it was a totally political move. In a lot of ways, Robeson was treated as the voice of reason to stop the protest. So he was used in a lot of ways the same way Jackie was used 6 years later in front of HUAC.
See, that's and that's the thing. Again, I'm gonna go back to that.
But could I go one step further here, Roland? I just want to throw one last thing at you too. And that goes back to the tactics. And so the very next day afterward, the Pittsburgh Courier, when the legendary Hall of Fame sports writer Wendell Smith comes out and talks about what a great moment this was, and that for the first time, Landis is showing that they are open to integration, and nothing could have been farther from the truth. The Black press wildly overplayed the story. There was nothing that came out of Robeson's presentation or the presentation of the Black press that day to suggest that these owners were going to integrate. In fact, as soon as they closed those doors, as soon as Robeson and the delegation left, the owners were like, we are absolutely making sure that these guys aren't going to be part of Major League Baseball. And
see right there. Go ahead.
No, and that once again was a reminder of how little power the Black press had, but you had to try something. And that's why when you're working on these projects, you're trying to figure out, what the tone of the book is going to be, because in a 2025, 2026 voice, you're like, y'all got played. How couldn't you see you were going to get played? But in 1943, what choice did you have? In 1943, you had no power at all.
But if I do bring it present day, what has to happen, and I say this all the time, especially when I'm having these meetings with ad agencies and others, and I'll say, my frat brother Todd Brown with Urban Edge Network, and we've been in these meetings, and he said, let me be perfectly clear, everybody in this meeting is getting paid to be here except me. And so we've said, y'all are rewarding us with meetings. And I think what has to happen is, and again, I think back to the Players Coalition, what happened with Kaepernick and all these other different things. It's because when you are a student of history and you understand these battles, it's understanding that the meeting is not the reward. The meeting itself is not the win.
Yeah.
And there have been so many times when we fail for the okie doke of that.
Sounds like Jay-Z in front of the commissioner's office, right?
So it's like, no. I'm not about to sit. So the meeting ain't the real, and that's the thing for me where I don't care. Take it. I don't care what it is. It's like, no, you're not. I get, yes, we had a meeting, but I tell them all the time, unless I'm getting an advertising check, ain't no win. The meeting is not a win. And that's really, as you were talking, that's really what just kept jumping out. They were just happy because they'd been ignored, because they'd been complete doors shut. It was like, damn, we got inside. We're at the table. No, they allowed you in. But to your point, when that door closed, it was like, we ain't doing a damn thing. They just
did it. They did it strategically. It wasn't done. And that's the thing, right? I mean, one of the questions that we always talk about when we're talking about merit and the rest of these things is, what is the strategy? The strategy here for the baseball owners in 1943 was not to integrate. It was to find a way to slow down the protest, to buy time. It was to buy time. It wasn't to say, okay, we really want Black players in the game. They didn't want Black players in the game. And that included Branch Rickey. They did not want Black players in the game. You
literally sound right now like when I interviewed DeMaurice Smith about his book, when he was describing, this is what the NFL owner strategy was. It ain't to do this. It's to slow it down. It's to do this. It's to curry favor. It's to build PR. So as you were talking, you sounded just like what he said.
Turf wars, baby. And it's also, and when I thought about Jackie, one of the reasons why this book was also really important to me was the way that we treat his integration of the game, the way that we treat April 15th, 1947. And it is a moment in American history that deserves everything that it's gotten. It was a moment that made people feel good. It was a moment that gave people hope. It was the moment that opened the door for other Black players. But what it didn't do, and what bothered me the most, and one of the things that I really wanted to get at in this book, was it did not change the minds of these owners. The people, in fact, it doubled down that these owners believed that when Branch Rickey signed Jackie Robinson, it was the greatest betrayal of their business. They were convinced that Jackie was going to destroy baseball, not because he couldn't play, but because he could. And that if he succeeded, to be the great player that it was obvious that he could be, then that meant that black fans were going to come to the game. And if black fans brought their black money to the sport, white fans wouldn't want to sit next to them. The baseball owners believed in 1945 that Branch Rickey had triggered an existential crisis financially for them. No differently from the way that the studies show what white people will do if a certain number of black people move into the neighborhood. They're going to leave. And so in 1946, the baseball owners wrote a private report to the commissioner, to Happy Chandler, saying that Branch Rickey has done irreparable damage to the sport. And so for me, I wanted that counter narrative to exist, because everyone treats 1947 like it was the dawn of this new day. But what did it do to Jackie, the individual? What did it do to Jackie, the man? By 1949, when Jackie is about to testify against Robeson, on opening day 1949, which is 4.5 years after he's been signed, there's 7 black players in the game, and 5 of them play for the Indians and the Dodgers. That baseball did not integrate, that they had no intention, that April 15th, 1947 may have made you, the fan, the progressive fan who cared about the sport, may have made you feel good. Jackie Robinson may have been your favorite player, but inside the sport, they saw a disaster. And there's a reason why it took, Jackie Robinson was retired when the Phillies and the Tigers and the Red Sox integrated. He went his whole career and the whole sport wasn't integrated. For this reason, they did not want black players, because they believed that the presence of black people was going to undermine them financially and ruin franchise values, which is very, very similar to the way people talk about housing.
And not just the housing, because as you were talking, what immediately jumped into my head is we often, and I get why we do it, but we often say, this is America. John Hope Bryant and I always talk about it. He's like, it ain't black, it ain't white, it's green. Well, there are numerous examples where
it's not
they
green.
They will forego more green to maintain whiteness. I think about Hollywood when the annual study comes out saying, Hollywood is losing out on some $10 billion when it comes to diversity, and they're like, yeah, well, we're good. We're fine. We're good. And then now with Trump's attacks on DEI, we saw the report how all of a sudden Hollywood has gotten whiter. All of these companies who no longer have to worry about DEI, now the new board of directors officers are more white and male, going back to how it used to be. And what the moment exposes, what you just described, is that what the moment exposes is whether or not people really care about that issue, or if they want to maintain status quo.
Well, that's the reason why. I was going to say that's the reason. That's the reason why the original titles of I took the chapter titles out, but one of the original titles in the Robinson chapters was The Illusion of Merit. And we see this all the time, that when you talk about, I mention it quite often, that we spend a lot of our time trying to prove merit. They hire for comfort. We talk about merit. They talk about comfort.
Oh, we run down our resume.
That's right.
I interviewed Elliot Williams earlier for his book on the Bernie Getz shooting, and he talked about being called a DEI hire, and he has 3 Ivy League degrees. And I literally said, Elliot, they don't care. I said, you can have 5 Ivy League degrees. They're still going to say DEI hire. I said, so that's why.
Well, they're going to say you got into it. Your admission was DEI. Whatever it is, they're going to find a way.
So for me, I just go to Della Reese and Hall of Knights. Y'all can kiss my entire ass. I love that scene, because my deal is, you're not going to accept anything. So I am not about to just kill myself explaining to you my worth when you ain't listening. So you can just kiss my ass.
Yeah, well,
I'm gonna perform.
That's right. And what I found really interesting about these two battles here between these two was placing Jackie Robinson in a position that we had never seen before, which was the black anti-communist. His position, by placing him in opposition to Robeson, he was put in a very, very difficult position. But once again, why did he feel like he had to do it? One, because Branch Rickey had given him something that Black people had wanted, which was admission into the major leagues. It changed his life. It changed the lives of a lot of people, and he felt a certain loyalty. And it goes back to that W.E.B. Du Bois Tunis question of, can you defend America and criticize it at the same time? And Rachel Robinson gave this great interview where she said, well, Jack was the kind of person who was like, hey, my country, right or wrong, that I have a stake in this. And he's not wrong about that. So when people say, oh, well, Jackie was a pawn for the segregationists, I understand his position as well, which is, hey, we were born here and we have a piece of this. And that is different, but that is no different from what Robeson said.
Right.
In 56.
Robeson literally is quoted
because my father was a slave and I will not let you or anyone else take that away from me. Whatever the quote is.
And Robeson takes it back to the American Revolution.
That's right. Well, Robeson's family was American before the United States. I mean, before the United States was even founded. And so it is the great question. And that was what this book was really all about, was about tactics and about strategy and about, can you find your place here as African Americans? Can you, and that's where when you talk about who the pawns were, that's why when you look at the Black leadership that decided that the best way for us to maintain our white allies, the best way for us to maintain the civil rights gains that we're trying to make, the best possible way for us to move forward, which included, by the way, former allies like A. Philip Randolph and, Bayard Rustin and those guys and Walter White, these guys who really once did admire Robeson, was to isolate him and was to abandon him, was to really sort of sell him out. These are the exact same people who once Brown versus Board of Education hits and once the Civil Rights Movement hits, they're the ones now being called communists the same way the whites had called Robeson communist.
And then now that's 1954. Now let's jump forward 13 years when, and the reason I think this is really the parallel between MLK and Robeson and what you just described is that the moment they begin to talk about American foreign policy is when America says, oh no, we can't have these Negro leaders going there. So let's talk when MLK really at the insistence of his wife, Coretta Scott King, began to oppose the Vietnam War.
That's right.
What you just described, same thing happened. Whitney Young, Roy Wilkins, NAACP, Carl Rowan, all of these African Americans who lauded MLK opposed him. How dare you? What are you doing? You're hurting the movement. You're cutting. I mean, labor. All of these people, mind your business. Stay in the South. You know nothing about Vietnam.
And they called him a communist. Different from what they had done to Robeson. And so that is the battle. And so you start to look. And then also, I think the other thing too, what I wanted to get at here was to make sure, and you have these different moments when you're writing about, okay, well, what does this book have to have? Because the checklist is so big, there's all the stuff that gets left out. You're like, what does it have to have? Well, the one thing it has to have is you have to understand that the reader has to recognize just what anti-communist, what the anti-communist fervor was. That people really, neighbor versus neighbor, people telling on each other. J. Edgar Hoover essentially encouraging Americans to snitch on each other and ruin careers. You look at the Hollywood 10, you look at all of these different examples. And, we talk about cancel culture today. Paul Robeson, the federal government took his passport and did not allow him to leave the country for 8 years. He lost all of his work here.
He couldn't work here, so he couldn't work abroad.
He couldn't work here, couldn't work abroad, and most importantly, couldn't talk about what was happening in the United States, couldn't talk about the racial situations in the United States. And they had, the government had tried to make deals with him and tell him, we'll let you travel as long as you do two things. You have to, one, sign an anti-communist affidavit that you have no affiliation with the Communist Party. And then the next thing you have to do is when you go abroad, you have to promise you will not talk about the domestic situation for Black people in America. And he would do neither.
Before I go to the next thing, I do, when you mentioned Walter White, led the NAACP. And the the parallels are amazing. Walter White, Thurgood Marshall, they love Robeson because he raised money for the NAACP, but they could not stand his strong stance. And then they were so scared to death because of communism. And then they give him their top medal, the Spingarn Medal, and they are pissed off because of what Robeson has to say. And I'm reading that, and I'm thinking also, again, moving forward into the next decade. Jackie Robinson could not called Roy Wilkins arrogant. He traveled the country raising money for the NAACP, but he hated the arrogant leadership of Roy Wilkins. So it's unbelievable.
And he got the spin gun in '56.
So it's unbelievable when you look at this testimony before Congress, and you look at these two individuals, and you look at where they were in 1949, and then all of a sudden you go into the 60s, and you look at where Robeson stood when it came to loving America but criticizing America, and then later in life, Jackie writes a book where he says, "I will not stand for the Star Spangled Banner. I will not sing the national anthem because." And he lays it out in his book, and so it is just amazing how they were put at odds. But in so many ways, they were the same.
Ended up in the same place. That's exactly right. And that's what this book is all about. How you have, I think the way that I put it was, you have these two guys, these two American giants, one in harsh critique of the United States, the other in defense of it, ending up in the same place. And that's really what this whole project was about. How did these two men end up in the same place? And I felt like what was fascinating about it was the lanes are seductive to all of us. We all want to feel like there's something we can do to be part of this. And then you get reminded, I think, as Londa Robeson, Robeson's wife, said this, we are Americans and we love this country, but we are reminded in so many heartbreaking ways that it does not love us. And that sort of is this navigation. And what I find fascinating about it, and the reason why this book was so important to me, was it is a constant lineage. You can tell, you could write this story through Ali. You could write this story through Kaepernick. You could write this story through Jackie. You could write this story through Robeson. You could write this story through Du Bois. And I love Du Bois, as complicated as Du Bois was, the story's not that long ago. That W.E. Du Bois was born in 1868. He dies in 1963 at age 95. He doesn't even, he doesn't die in the United States. He dies in Ghana. And
yeah, actually on the same
March
time
in Washington.
For jobs and freedom.
That's right. And says, at no point was I an American. Did I ever feel like a man? And what I found fascinating about him in the story is how short time is. This man was born 3 years after the Civil War. As an adult, he overlapped Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Jackie Robinson, Paul Robeson, William Monroe Trotter, Booker T. Washington, Muhammad Ali. He overlapped all of them in one lifetime.
Well, that's why I love Mr. B, because he would talk about his conversation with Robeson, and then he would go to MLK, and then he would go to Nelson Mandela, then he would go to Obama. And again, same thing. Lived
he
to
overlapped
95 years old.
That's right. And if you live during the right 95, you overlap a lot of American history.
A couple more questions, but I do, because when you mentioned Kaepernick and you mentioned a couple other things, I think about Mahmoud Abdul Rauf and others. I love this when you talk about this interview that Bod Rustin gave to Duberman for his book, where Rustin, Bod Rustin, this seminal figure for fight for civil rights, who admits how they strategize, as he wrote, to isolate Robeson. We have to prove that we're patriotic. And when I bring this thing present day, it's amazing how even right now, where the NFL would say no politics, but I'm sorry, aren't you hosting a senator and a congressman in the owner's box? How same thing when you have, I was just watching a video and one of the Washington Wizards basketball players was saying, and I think he was talking about Eton Thomas, saying
Mm-hmm.
that when he would not go out for the flag, and David Stern called him and he said, "Hey, it's not my contract, whatever." And Stern said, "Oh no, it's not. But I will make sure you never get signed by any team. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
out there for the national anthem." And so this whole idea that when sports figures, when prominent African Americans, when they decide to step outside of their accepted lane
Mm-hmm.
and then begin to challenge America on issues of race and class, all of a sudden, the tactic is always, don't you dare question patriotism. You are going to show that you are a true American. And so again, drape yourself in the flag, repeat the Pledge of Allegiance, stand for that anthem, do all of that. That tactic has always been used to pit African Americans against one another and to silence the agitators for change.
Well, and Jackie had said himself, the reason why I did this was because the reason I did this, I testified against Robeson, was because I didn't want white people to view us as unpatriotic. He knew what he was doing, and he knew the audience that he was speaking to, and he felt like it was important, and it was important in some ways. And then some ways, when you're reading this, and to me, it was the pylon, Roland, that got me. I understood where everybody was at. I understood that it was a lose-lose situation to side, to even look, to give the appearance that you had sided with the Soviet Union during McCarthyism, during the 1940s. I get that piece. What I don't get was the pylon, was the strategy that, okay, we're not just going to sit silent on this. They could have been silent, but instead, you had Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph and Walter Whiteley and NAACP strategizing. You had Roy Wilkins writing in The Crisis and editorial talking about, Paul Robeson is one of us, but he is not of us.
Wait a minute, you write the legendary poet Langston Hughes, himself under attack by HUAC and anti-communist forces, sacrificed Robeson to save himself, removing Robeson's name from 3 of his popular children's volumes on influential Black Americans.
And did this, and then went after Lena Horne as well. And so the argument during the Hollywood 10, because the Black presence in Hollywood was so small anyway, essentially the strategy to them was, we'll leave you alone, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and Lena Horne and Canada Lee. We'll leave you alone if you give us Robeson.
And I'm sitting here again. It's so funny how people, and again, I've read many of his books, and he was often he was in the face of so many civil rights leaders, won Pulitzer Prizes, all that sort of stuff. You say 1993, the Pulitzer Prize winning historian and journalist David Halberstam published the best-selling book, The 50s, a sweeping 800-page history of the pivotal decade from the rise of the post-war American consumer class, blah, blah, blah. You say, yet Paul Robeson's name does not appear once. And again, I remember earlier we talked about how complicated things are. I happened to be reading, man, I forgot what the hell I was reading. And they were talking about an article Halberstam wrote, I believe it was on the first Black mayor in Cleveland, and how Halberstam literally made some remarks that essentially Blacks were not ready for leadership and things along those lines. And
yeah,
so,
I think that was Carl Stokes and the children.
But he's held up as this, again, white ally who chronicled the story of African Americans, the civil rights
And David
movement.
was a mentor of mine, and I love David. David Halberstam helped me very much in my career, and that's why it was so fascinating when you go back and you look. And this is what I mean about the power of what of those times, and what everything that is not in these stories. And it goes back to the thing you and I talk about all the time, which is that you have to, who are we as a people if we don't have access and don't have agency to our own story?
And who gets to write the story, and that's a reason why Freedom's Journal, that first Black newspaper, said, we wish to plead our own cause, too long have others spoken for us. I ask every author this question, and I'll ask you to close this out, and it's very simple. And you've already revealed some of this, but that wow moment, you're doing research and you're going through these different things. and it could be several. It probably was 100 or 500, but you're sitting there going, that made you go, wow, this is unbelievable. I cannot believe this happened, or I came across this.
I think the biggest wow moment for me in terms of just narrative was the recognition that for everything that we have learned about the integration story in baseball, was that Branch Rickey was not the figure that he's put up to be. That if he had, I think about what it would have been like if he had his way, that there wouldn't have been a Jackie Robinson. There would have been the very same sort of Latino baseball economy that we have now, and the black players would have been, they would have been left out. The Willie Mazes and the Hank Aaron's and the Jackie Robinsons and the Campanellas and the Newcombs and all of those great players. The bottom line simply was that we were better players, and that at the end of the day, when Branch Rickey had spent all that money, he came back to Jackie Robinson.
For the person who, let's say they don't know jack about, they just know number 42. For the person who's never heard of Paul Robeson, for the person who comes across this book 50 years from now, what do you hope they take away from it?
I hope they see the record. I hope they see, who knows what this world is going to be looking like then. But once again, I think it was very, very clear to me that when you're thinking about the Black American story in this country, that we stand in the center of it. We're not off to the side only on Black issues, that the Cold War story was as American a story as there was, and that this is a part of it that was not discussed. But we were very much a part of it. I mean, I think that to me is the thing that I really wanted to get at, was we're not over to the side when it's time to talk about Black people, right? When you talk about America, you talk about us the same way you talk about everybody else in all of our full dimension and complexity.
I meant to ask this earlier. This will be, that is, you mentioned April 15th. And I make an effort, April 15th, to remind people that, again, that wasn't the day that Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball. That was the day he integrated white baseball. What is it that Black people should not forget about the Negro Leagues? And I get, again, I get all of, his accomplishments, and then let these other Black players coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that too often, too many of us ignore the massive amount of talent that was in the Negro Leagues.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
again, it wasn't about talent. It was not about baseball. It wasn't about merit. It was that the quote Major Leagues, it was white people with more money, better stadiums, better uniforms, better travel, better food, all of that. But the Major League talent, that was Negro Leagues.
Yeah, I think, to me, the other piece of it that I think is instructive even for today, and especially today, as there's been so much retrenchment, is that we as a people, however we're going to do it, however it plays out, have got to rebuild our own institutions, because the current momentum is to exclude us from those mainstream institutions. And as you're doing, this is what you're doing with your empire, with what you're building. You've got to have some lane where you have access and agency of your own story, whether it be your own baseball leagues. And I know it's like, you sound like a segregationist, but it's not being a segregationist, it's having agency. Obviously, you would rather have your story be included as seamless, but it's not. So you have to find those different lanes to express yourself on your terms. And that's why the Negro Leagues are so important.
Well, I'll dare say the wow moment for me in this whole interview is I cannot believe those two never met.
Isn't it incredible? I mean,
And I think about
obviously that is the biggest one.
Malcolm X and MLK only met one time.
How do you not meet when you're Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson? You're both in Harlem. How do you not cross paths? Now, the reason that Paul Robeson Jr. once said in an interview he did with ESPN was that Jackie's road was so difficult and Paul's road was becoming increasingly more toxic that Paul made it a point for Jackie's sake to not complicate Jackie's life with a meeting. That was the explanation that that Paul Robeson Jr. had given, that Paul had too much respect for Jackie to complicate Jackie's life with how the country was treating Paul Robeson.
Which sounds eerily familiar to Malcolm X going to the hotel room of Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee before the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and tell them, if Dr. King needs my help, like
isn't it a continuum, right? Isn't it a continuum?
Yeah,
that
Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, Robeson and Robinson, Malcolm, and it's
all one story. And I think that's the piece of it. If I had to amend my answer, that's the story. It's one long continuum of a story. And last but not least, let's not forget Moses Fleetwood Walker, the actual first Black player in the major leagues back in 1884, who before Robinson and before Robeson had concluded in 1906 after being kicked out of the major leagues after the 1884 season. 20 years later, he writes a memoir and realizes there's no room for us here. We have to go back to Africa.
Stunning. The book is Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. How long did it take you to write it?
About 5 years. And believe me, that book could have been 1,000 pages. I tried to really keep it to these two moments. I just wanted to focus on these. I wanted to focus on these two moments.
You were having you want to have your Robert Cairo moment?
Oh man, just one quick thing about Robert Cairo. That man has been working on Lyndon Johnson, and this is true, my whole life.
Yes.
He started working on Lyndon Johnson in 1968.
Bruh, I have all the books. And what's crazy,
it's
the
incredible.
books that we have that got published, they were edited down.
That's right. It's truly a life's work. Yeah.
His research is on a whole other level.
He's off the charts. He's off the charts.
It's like
when ball players, when teammates or opponents talk about Barry Bonds, we play baseball, he does something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, that the mind of Barry Bonds is unbelievable. I'm gonna leave you with this one. I wish this was recorded. There's not even a photo of this because it just sort of happened. Jeffrey Osborne golf tournament. It gets washed out. This was several years ago. Massive storm blows through, no tournament. So we're inside. We're sitting around talking, eating. So I'm sitting here, and to my right is Ahmad Rashad. To his left is Eddie Levert. To his right, Eddie Levert. To his left is Barry Bonds, and to his right is Sugar Ray Leonard. And then later, Jay Harris of ESPN comes and sit down. And I say something to Eddie about when they performed at Oprah's Legends Ball, and Oprah told them to change their playlist, and Eddie was not happy. And so Eddie then starts talking about the work that I do and how he loves watching me on television. And then this thing evolves into it was the most fascinating conversation. It evolved into a conversation about how do you achieve greatness in your field. Yeah. So Ahmad is talking about how to be an all-pro wide receiver, and Eddie's talking about Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. And Barry Bonds said, "Listen, I can teach somebody 2 of the 10 things you do how to hit. he doesn't have the capacity to handle all 10 things. And then Sugar Ray is talking how it was the most fascinating conversation, just talking about in our areas how you do this and how you you switch the conversation and this, that, and the other. It was just like Sugar Ray goes, Roland, you've been a great boxer. I was like, are you out your mind? He says, no. I saw you dancing on stage last night. He said, and all I was looking at was your feet. He said, and I was looking at how you were just moving, a guy your size moving. I was like, yeah, but I got to take a punch. He's like, so it was crazy how he was looking at footwork, dancing, and equating the box. It was just crazy, bro. It was unbelievable. Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. Howard Bryant, you have written another fascinating book. I've already sent Spike Lee an email saying, Spike, this would be an amazing movie. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, man.
Appreciate it.